The crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across the marble floors as Margaret wiped her weathered hands on her apron, her dark fingers trembling slightly as she arranged the final garnish on the elaborately prepared dishes. She had spent 14 hours preparing this feast for Mr. Harrison's exclusive dinner party, pouring every ounce of her culinary expertise into each plate. But as the wealthy guests began filing into the dining room, their designer shoes clicking against the polished floor, she couldn't shake the knot forming in her stomach. She had worked in this mansion for 23 years, but tonight felt different. Tonight, she could feel the weight of their stares, heavy with judgment, as they glanced from the steaming plates to her face and back again, their expressions shifting from curiosity to something far more unsettling. Margaret had been with the Harrison family since little Emma was born. She remembered cradling that precious baby girl in her arms, singing her to sleep when Mrs. Harrison had passed away from cancer. She had been there for every scraped knee, every bad dream, every first day of school. The kitchen had become her kingdom, and Emma, now a bright-eyed 12-year-old, was like the daughter she never had. Tonight's dinner party was crucial for Mr. Harrison's business. He had invited 7 millionaire investors, each worth more than Margaret would earn in 10 lifetimes. She had outdone herself, preparing a menu that would make any 5-star restaurant envious: truffle-infused butternut squash soup, herb-crusted lamb chops with rosemary reduction, wild mushroom risotto, and her signature chocolate soufflé that had won her 3 county fair blue ribbons back when she still entered such competitions. As the guests settled into their seats, Margaret began serving the first course. She moved gracefully between the chairs, her practiced hands placing each bowl with precision. But she noticed something that made her heart sink. The conversation stopped when she approached. Eyes followed her movements with barely concealed suspicion. And then she heard it, a whisper from Mrs. Blackwell, a woman dripping in diamonds and disdain. "I'm not sure about this, Richard," she murmured to her husband, loud enough for others to hear. "The help prepared this food. In my home, I would never let someone like that touch what we eat." Margaret's hands steadied the tray, though inside she felt something crack. She had heard such comments before, scattered throughout her decades of service, but never so brazenly, never in a home where she thought she belonged. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Margaret is an excellent cook. I assure you all, the food is prepared to the highest standards." But the damage was done. One by one, the guests found reasons to avoid eating. Mr. Chen pushed his soup bowl away, claiming a sudden lack of appetite. Mrs. Rodriguez picked up her spoon, examined it with exaggerated scrutiny, then set it down with a delicate clink. The Vanderbilts whispered to each other, shaking their heads. Within minutes, 7 untouched bowls of soup sat cooling on the table, each rejection another silent insult. Margaret stood by the kitchen door, fighting back tears that had nothing to do with the onions she had chopped hours earlier. 23 years of loyalty, of early mornings and late nights, of sacrificing time with her own aging mother to care for this family, and this was how she was treated. Not by the Harrisons, but by people who judged her worth by the color of her skin before ever tasting the love she had cooked into every dish. Emma had been watching from the staircase, initially excited to see her father's important dinner party. But as she observed the scene unfolding, her young face transformed from confusion to understanding to something fierce and determined. She had listened to Margaret's stories, eaten her cooking every day of her life, and learned from this woman what it meant to give without expecting anything in return. Without a word, Emma descended the stairs. Her footsteps, though light, seemed to echo through the suddenly silent dining room. She wore her favorite yellow dress, her hair tied back with a ribbon Margaret had given her for her birthday. Every eye turned to watch as this child walked purposefully toward the table. "Emma, sweetheart, it's past your bedtime, Mr. Harrison said gently, though there was relief in his voice at the interruption. Emma ignored him. She walked straight to Margaret's soup bowl, the one Margaret had set aside for herself in the kitchen, and picked it up. Then, with the kind of courage that only comes from pure, untainted conviction, she carried it to the center of the dining room table and sat down in the empty chair at the head. "What are you doing, dear?" Mrs. Blackwell asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Emma looked directly at her, then at each guest in turn, her young eyes blazing with an intensity that made grown millionaires shift uncomfortably in their seats. "I'm going to eat Margaret's food," Emma said clearly. And I'm going to eat every single dish she made tonight, right here in front of all of you. Emma, honey, you don't have to, Margaret whispered, stepping forward, her eyes now brimming with tears for an entirely different reason. Yes, I do, Emma replied, her voice stronger now. Because if Margaret's food isn't good enough for them, then they aren't good enough to be in our house. She picked up the spoon and took a deliberate bite of the soup. Then another. And another. The silence in the room was deafening. Emma savored each spoonful, occasionally closing her eyes in appreciation, making small sounds of pleasure that echoed in the cavernous dining room. This is the best soup I've ever tasted, Emma announced, setting down her spoon and looking at her father. Margaret taught me that you can taste love in good cooking. She says that when you cook for someone, you put a piece of your heart on the plate. These people, she gestured to the stunned guests, decided her heart wasn't worth trying before they even took one bite. Mr. Harrison stood up slowly, his face flushed. For a moment, no one was sure what he would do. Then he walked to his daughter, placed a hand on her shoulder, and looked at his assembled guests. My daughter has shown more wisdom in 5 minutes than all of us have shown in our entire lives, he said quietly. Margaret has been part of this family for over 2 decades. She held my hand when my wife died. She raised my daughter when I was too broken to function. And tonight, she spent 14 hours creating something beautiful for people she had never met, hoping only to make them happy. He picked up one of the rejected soup bowls and took a spoonful. His eyes widened. This is extraordinary. The room remained frozen. Then something unexpected happened. Young Timothy Chen, the 7-year-old son of Mr. Chen, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, stood up and walked to the table. Without a word, he picked up a bowl and began eating. His father watched, stunned, as his son smiled with genuine delight. Dad, try it, Timothy said simply. It's really good. Mr. Chen's face went through a series of emotions, embarrassment, shame, realization, before he finally picked up his spoon. The first taste stopped him cold. Then he took another, and another, each bite seeming to chip away at whatever ugly prejudice had prevented him from eating in the first place. One by one, the guests began to eat. Some did so reluctantly, forced by the mirror Emma had held up to their souls. Others ate with growing enthusiasm as they realized what they had nearly rejected. The lamb chops were praised. The risotto earned murmurs of appreciation. And when Margaret's chocolate soufflé emerged from the kitchen, perfectly risen and decadent, Mrs. Blackwell herself asked for a second serving. But Margaret wasn't watching the guests anymore. She was looking at Emma, this child who had become her whole world, who had stood up when no one else would, who had seen her humanity when others saw only a uniform and a skin color. After the guests left, many offering awkward apologies, Emma found Margaret in the kitchen, finally allowing herself to cry. Why are you sad? Emma asked, wrapping her small arms around Margaret's waist. They ate your food. They loved it. I'm not sad, baby girl, Margaret said, holding her tight. I'm crying because I'm grateful. Grateful that in this whole big house full of rich people, the person with the biggest heart was you. Mr. Harrison entered the kitchen, his own eyes red. Margaret, I'm so sorry. I should have said something sooner. I should have. You raised her right, Margaret interrupted, stroking Emma's hair. That's what you should have done, and you did it. The next morning, Mr. Harrison's company lost 3 of the 7 potential investors. Mrs. Blackwell and the Vanderbilts withdrew, unwilling to do business with a man who had embarrassed them. But the story of what happened that night spread through their social circles, then through the city, then beyond. Emma's simple act of defiance became a touchstone, a reminder that children often see the truth that adults have trained themselves to ignore. 5 new investors reached out to Mr. Harrison within a week, people who said they wanted to work with a man who valued character over capital, who raised children to stand up rather than stand by. Margaret continued working for the Harrisons, but something had fundamentally changed. She no longer felt invisible. And Emma, who had always been wise beyond her years, learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply choose love over fear, acceptance over prejudice, and humanity over hatred. The rest, as she would learn throughout her life, has a way of following.